experience in this area and who will be making a range of contributions. I've also asked and kindly Gertrude Mugizi, who heads up PSAM's regional learning program, to step up and participate in the panel. And then on Gertrude's right, we have Mr. Ludovic Uto, who is director of the Wajibu Institute in Tanzania, the former Auditor General of that country. So we thank him for his involvement. And then last, but by no means least, is Advocate Mohammed Amirmia, who is a commissioner at the South African Human Rights Commission of South Africa and has been a commissioner for some years. So we look forward to their contributions. We did not ask the panelists to prepare a PowerPoint. We wanted them to make a range of contributions. We wanted to be somewhat informal, and we will be giving, there will be some time for questions and engagements from you. After lunch, we will then have a breakaway session. We had Professor Madonsela in the keynote address making a few points of emphasis around how to promote social accountability. One of the observations that she made was incentivize people. Show them what's in it for them. Certainly in the South African context, we've been exposed to corruption and what corruption offers up as incentives for private gain as opposed to public gain and public benefit. So I'd like to hear from our panelists their thoughts on what are the incentives that exist to promoting social accountability from their experiences. The mic is available. Would anybody like to kick us off? Or I see there's a Gertrude or Advocate Gertrude.
Really?
If you like.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I didn't expect to be the first one to speak because the rest of the panel is far more veteran in this area than I am, but I will kick it off. I'll speak first.
Just closer.
Hello?
No, it's not.
It's not on.
It is on. Just closer to your.
Yeah, so.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I was saying the rest of the panel is far more experienced at this. The rest of the panel is far more experienced at this than me. For me, social accountability for me is when I joined, I should start maybe, when I joined civil society in a social accountability capacity, in an advocacy capacity, it was very much you're doing it wrong. We will tell you what we need and you must make it right. I have learned over the years that as Professor Madonsela was saying, I might be justified in saying that, but it doesn't make me effective. And if I want things to actually change, I have to learn to have conversations with people who I don't necessarily agree with. I have to learn to have conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with me. I have to learn to have conversations with people who have very different views from the ones I have, and still work with them to achieve a goal that we see as common. And that is not an easy thing to do. And it requires that we all change, that we all compromise, that we all negotiate, etc., the things that we talk about all the time. But how do you create an incentive for someone who doesn't agree with me to sit at the table and talk to me for long enough to get something to happen, for long enough to achieve a result? And that's the difficult thing. I feel that when we do have these conversations, I think the more we have these conversations, the more we learn how to have them. But there are certain things that make these conversations work or remain conversations long enough for this to happen. One is that we need to agree on what the result that we want is. If what we want is, in a community conversation, for example, if the result is that I want water to be coming out of the taps every day when I need it, we ought to all agree that that is what we are working towards to achieve. And if we agree on the end result, to disagree on the method of getting there will not be such a train smash as to derail the conversation. I will be motivated to remain in the conversation because the result I think that the conversation is going to lead me to is clear to both of us. And I will be more likely to listen to what the other person is saying. The second thing is that I must listen. I find that when we speak it is the easiest narrative to come out of a civil society person including myself in some cases, is that things are so wrong. How did they get so wrong? Somebody must do this and make things right. But I do feel that often it is much more difficult to hear that actually I also need to change what I am doing. In civil society, it's very easy. I heard a lot of this morning as well, that what do we do when governments are corrupt? What do we do when institutions of government have been captured? What do we do when we can't trust them to deliver what we need? But to be absolutely honest, they can turn around and say the same thing about us. And they often do. Because the more we tell, I remember having a conversation with a government official, a senior government official, about why things happen in this way. And one thing he told me is that if there is corruption in government, it means there is corruption in all other aspects of society as well. Yeah, because you can't be corrupt by yourself. Yeah. If someone is paying me wrongly to do something, or if I am benefiting wrongly, it means that there must be someone who's engaging with me in this interaction. And how do you get a conversation in society whereby it is not about you, the person, or it is not about I am right and you are wrong. It is about what kind of conversation do we have to build a society whereby there are certain principles on which that we follow, and that we all see those principles in the same way, and that we agree that they are good, and that we agree to follow them and abide by them, both overtly and covertly, even when nobody is looking. And those principles are there in our constitutions. They are there in our legislative framework. We talk about them. But yet, in many of our societies, we still feel that sometimes it is okay to see something happening that is against those principles and overlook it for reasons that we know ourselves. Yes? Impune corruption happens because we have impune passivity, or we don't take action against what is happening as civil society. And taking action is a social accountability responsibility in itself. Yes? I feel that if I don't take action, then I am also being unaccountable. Yes? And my taking action must be to achieve the result that I want. So I must want the result. I must know that we all want the same result. We must have an engagement whereby we work towards that result in whatever way we do. I mean, I might choose an adversarial method some days, or a collaborative method other days, depending on what will move us towards that collective result. And I will perhaps hand over to my other colleagues with a question of, yes, we're in the conversation. Yes, we want the conversation to happen. And yes, we want to consider, we want to work collaboratively to or adversarially to achieve the principles that we have all agreed on. But what specifically in our experience, because there's a lot more experience than I have in the room, would cause us, me in my particular role, to remain in a conversation with people that I don't necessarily agree with their methods, and what would create an incentive structure in upholding the principles that we believe in? What would create an incentive structure that would cause us to see these principles as principles that I not only agree to in public, but I will also push them even when it's difficult to push them, even when it is going against my own personal gain or my own personal well-being. And what as a person, as an institution, would make this something that we all live by? And I don't know who I hand over now to now.
Thank you, Gertrude. You have concluded your submission with a question. I think the motivation of continuing being on the discussion table is looking at what the benefits which will accrue if you are able to convince the person. Because, you see, accountability, social accountability is creating change. Is creating change. We want governments, we want our stakeholders to perform better. And therefore, the motivation of you remaining on the discussion table is changing this person, converting him to be a change agent in improving or enhancing accountability. Is incentives on the accountability ecosystem. In the first place, I think we are all aware that the accountability ecosystem involves numerous types of people and institutions. And for the accountability to be realized, those involved in the system have to be convinced that there is something to gain. And we are all aiming at improving the provision of the universal human rights, the requirements of the common citizen, and really it leads into being an auditor general, retired auditor general. It all aims at maximizing the scarce public resources, which are not sufficient at any one time to meet the requirements of the government and society, in making sure that such resources are put into best use and that there is value for money for every penny used. Now, the incentive. I believe if we look at it from the government's point of view, all governments, their aim, even the dictatorial governments, their aim is to make provision to their people. And the governments know, believe me, most governments know that if they are not delivering, their chances of remaining in power are limited. So, on the part of the government, there is an incentive that they want to be seen that they are performing. And the government also knows that on its own they cannot reach every person of their constituency to be aware of actually what is going on in as far as development is concerned. And therefore, they know that they will need the media, they know that they will need civil society organizations to disseminate that information. The question is, and that's the point which was raised by our professor in her keynote address, there are leaders who are allergic to criticism, unfortunately. And therefore, CSOs, the media, should not only report the nice things of government, it should be the duty of the media and civil society organizations to report on the performance of governments, both the positive and negative. The question is, how do we report? And our professor raised a very valid point, I think, since we are the majority of CSOs here. She talked of mistrust, trust between the various players in this accountability ecosystem. As CSOs, I believe we have a responsibility of building that trust. And how do we do it? Let us be transparent. You see, as a civil society organization, if you are working with the local government authorities, as you are planning for your activities, as you are developing your plans, involve them, bring them in the picture. You see, sometimes the mistrust comes because we do things under the table, and the government, whichever arm of the government is involved, is not even aware of what we intend to achieve. But if we became more transparent, if we became more accountable ourselves as civil society organizations, I believe it will address the issue of trust between the various players in the cycle. And the incentive for the CSOs and the other players in this is to bring about change. So it might take us a while to get the change. Sometimes CSOs also, we get frustrated because we want to see immediate results. Things do not operate that way. As CSOs, we should not always rush at imitating what is happening elsewhere in other countries. Really, we need to study the political environment we're operating in and act accordingly. We don't want all the CSO leaders to be shot and buried. It will not assist. So really we need to understand the environment we're operating in and then align our approaches in line with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uta. So there, key message is building trust starts at home.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Advocate Amermia around the work that the Commission has done, where one at times has to be critical, but also finding a balance between critical and fostering trust.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for having the Human Rights Commission here. I think it's an important conversation that we need to reflect on, particularly given the terms of reference. We need to be reflecting, learning, and adapting to the conversation in such a way that when we walk out of here, we walk out with concrete things so that we can make meaningful contributions in society in a greater way for the greater good as well. I think Professor Madonsela, who was our sister in her previous life, in our sister Chapter 9, had led by example, where she, dispensed with justice through the independence of her office without fear, favor, and prejudice. And the results basically spoke for itself. And I think that's good, because one needs to understand where we come from. We come from a very painful past. The transition into the new democracy, has brought a lot of challenges with it. I say this because, when the governors of the time in 1994 came into power, they were very passionate about human rights and addressing the ills of the past. But now 2018, 22 years later, we ask ourselves the same question: are the governors today as passionate about human rights to address the painful past, the injustices of the past, with the same passion and zeal and fervor as they had when they were when they came on board in 1994? I think I say this because, we are in a celebratory mode as we sit in 2018 for various reasons. I mean, we have, and justifiably so, reflecting on the 100th centenary celebrations of our icon, President Mandela, by Albertina Sisulu, and the contributions that they made were profound. It was not only local, but it was global. And they addressed those challenges fearlessly, and they spoke truth to power. Now, the question then arises on the role of the national human rights institutions as part of the accountability ecosystem. And I think I'd like to address it from that angle, Program Director, and I'd like to say that yes, a lot of things have gone right, but a lot of things have gone wrong also. And I think we must be brave enough to say, how can we make it better? We must admit, first of all, that we do not live in an ideal world, we live in a real world. And when real issues do come about, it's how do we then address those issues and go forward. Now, I think as a Human Rights Commission, we basically see accountability. It envisages that those in power will take responsibility for their actions. And that accountability, particularly state accountability, is then multi-dimensional. There is a vertical component to it, and there's a horizontal component to it. And that is, the elected representatives have to justify the actions and the decisions they take to the voters. Okay? And the horizontal accountability, on the other hand, refers to the existence of structures fostering checks and balances, such as the judiciary and the Chapter 9 institutions that we have entrenched in our Constitution. So I would say that the Chapter 9 institution, be it the Auditor General, the Public Protector, the South African Human Rights Commission, and the other sister Chapter 9 organizations, are basically in between institutions, okay? Such as the Ombuds Office, the Supreme Auditor, the Anti-Corruption Agencies, National Human Rights Institution, and others. We're basically addressing the same issue. We know what we've inherited, and we inherited a lot of pain and suffering, right? And we promised ourselves that we would, the preamble of the Constitution talks about it, that we will never go back to the past. We'll never allow ourselves to slip into the painful past either. So, therefore, as the Constitution itself, the founders of the Constitution realized that too much power vested in the executive is dangerous. It can lead to all kinds of unintended consequences, and that's why the supremacy of the Constitution is a key to hold the executive to accountabilities, which is rightfully so. It must be like that. And in our space in South Africa, whether it's the citizen or the non-citizen, anybody living in the South African space are entitled to those rights that are entrenched in the Bill of Rights, and that's 27 rights. I equate the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, on a more lighter note, like the appendix in the body. And I'm sure most of you will agree. Many scientists around the world can never tell you what is the purpose of an appendix in the body. As long as it functions, we live, we're happy. But the day that appendix ruptures, it's going to kill. So that's what we are saying is why the founders of the Constitution saw it fit to entrench the Bill of Rights in such a way that it will take a lot to change the Constitution if you want to, do away with any of the rights in the Bill of Rights itself. So I think we need to reflect on that. I'm saying this because the new leadership that's coming in and generations that are coming in after the 1994 generation are less passionate about human rights. They are careerists, and many of them have a don't care attitude. If you don't believe me, the Auditor General has done a reflection of the state of affairs of municipalities. And the state of municipalities in this country at the moment is in a state of disrepair. Yeah. And we must admit that now. People who are closest to the grassroots communities and citizens on the ground are the municipalities. If you have a dysfunctional municipality, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get anything, any resemblance of human rights, the right to dignity of rich and poor living side by side. It will never happen. In the Human Rights Commission, I basically talk about the issue of, and I'd like to share practical examples. I think I'll make my paper available for the conference organizers, and you can read it on your own time. But I'd like to reflect on a few examples that we saw on the ground. We went to provinces where the municipalities are under administration. They do not even have money to put petrol into the tankers, so communities cannot get water. And that's the uproar, okay? And nobody does, people try to think those problems away and blame protesters for service delivery protests. Now, it's untenable because, people's daily existence, as I said, you vote once in 5 years, but your right to water, sanitation, housing, education are day-to-day bread and butter issues. It's everybody's fundamental rights to have those itself. So if we do not have enough resources, then we must share our resources to do so. And I think when we come to the Human Rights Commission as one of the Chapter 9 institutions in the Constitution, we basically say that we are 8 commissioners with 200 staff, and we need to be servant leaders to a nation of 55 million people. It's impossible to be in every corner of this country with the limited resources we have. Therefore, we kind of encourage the collaborative, strategic partnerships with civil society organizations. And we then can use the leveraging powers that the Constitution gives us as a Human Rights Commission, right, to knock on the corridors of power and hold the officials to account for their actions and their conduct. Now, I'll give you 2 examples. I think 3 examples I'd like to kind of just highlight the point. In 2016, or in 2015, the University of Stellenbosch were grappling with how to deal against a very powerful business sector in the micro-lending industry. The stakes were 168 billion rand. The victims were 250,000 farm workers who could not even have enough money after they were being indebted by the micro lenders, right, into poverty traps to get from point A to point B. Joined hands, the university joined hands with the South African Human Rights Commission. We went to the Western Cape High Court, we got the remedies. The powerful state, the business sector appealed against it to the Constitutional Court. We went to the Constitutional Court and we won. What was shocking about that result, one, is that by the time we got to the Constitutional Court, the poor people were fleeced of 168 billion rand. But when the matter was decided in our favor in the Constitutional Court found that it's beyond 250,000 farm workers. This micro-lending is such a cancerous thing in society, right, that it affects 43% of the population in this country. And they quantified the value to be 1.6, it was about 1.8 trillion rand. It's a lot of money. I mean, where do poor people have that kind of leverage to go to institutions like the Constitutional Court, which is their right to do? But when you go there as adversaries, you must remember the powerful business gets the best lawyers, and they'll fight for their turf, you know. So that was the one example. The other example I'd give is now recently, you must have heard of the famous the Western Cape Legal Center, the Women's Legal Center that took the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Home Affairs to court on the vulnerabilities of women and children in Parliament not having passed the Muslim Marriages Act, or the bill that has been lying there in Parliament for 20 years. And they also got their day in court as well, where the court itself then said, we give you Parliament 24 months to fix up the problem, in failing which you will come and account to us. And they gave a cost order against it as well. The third dimension of the work that the Human Rights Commission does is we look into systemic problems, and it would then necessitate us calling for national investigations. We did that when we released our mining report about 3 weeks ago. And in the mining report, we found that the mines in social, economic affected communities, the tensions that were there, it was around basic bread butter issues. Marikana was a manifestation of that. And there were many other municipalities where these mines are situated, are having those constant battles and tensions, because what happens is a municipality, totally disempowered, cannot even effect legislation to protect the rights of people. People do not have water, they get water in tanks, the water tankers come in and they give filthy water to communities at irregular intervals and so forth. Now, people get frustrated, people get angry, and then they are going to raise their voices, and we need to say, but there are institutions like the Chapter 9s, you know, that offers this free of charge service. Come on hand, come on board with us so that we can make the difference itself. And when we released that report, we then went straight to the Interministerial Committee in Parliament, and Parliament accepted our recommendations. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hold Parliament to account for legislation that is there that must fix up those kind of problems. So Program Director, what I'm basically saying is we have a pivotal and a very important role to play as a Human Rights Commission. Like the Public Protector, we also have an independence to act without fear, favor and prejudice, and we want to make that difference. But we also appealed here. We think these kind of forums are very important. We need to take hands with you. You know, I say one thing about the Human Rights Commission, like we are fortunate. In one sense, our one foot is in the real world where the grime is, and the challenges are. But our other foot is in the academic spaces and those circles where we can tap onto the best practices so that we can learn and go forward as well. I'd like to echo the sentiments in conclusion, Chair, with our first speaker who said that we must continue these conversations. As uncomfortable as they are, it's not about me, it's about the greater good. And sometimes when that happens, we've got to put our egos in our back pockets. You don't have to be, a learned professor from here. You just have to be a human being, as my previous boss said to me many years ago, Jody Colopet, who later became the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, and he's now the judge in the High Court. And when I was appointed as a Human Rights Commission many, many years later, after I did my articles in his law firm, he called me to his office and he said to me, what do you understand by human rights? Because you are the new commissioner now. And the country has invested its confidence in you. And I looked at him and I said, I think it's the right to be a human being. He says, if you start off on that footing, then we can get every other thing right from that perspective. And that has taught me a lot. It has taught me a lot in the work that I've done and in the space that I worked in, and the wonderful people that I met, and the wonderful things I've learned. But you do it fearlessly, robustly, because you have the Constitution as a wonderful leveraging power to make it happen. So, Chair, I'm saying to us, these forums are very important, and please join us, because this is how we can make not only the Human Rights Commission, but all the other Chapter 9s even more stronger if we do the strategic collaborative partnerships, so that the outreach is for the greater good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Advocate. I'd like to now turn to Dalitso to share some of the experiences that Medjin, which is a network, has in collective action, in working collaboratively.
Thank you very much. Coming after my elders have spoken, and I think they've pretty much shared everything perhaps that we need to know about the incentives and how the enhanced social accountability strategy could help us work and see the results. I almost said, well, as has already been said. Let me just add to that conversation. First of all, appreciating this privilege of being a part of this conversation. As a young man, 18 years ago, a young economist, I've pretty much been privileged, I think, because it's been a journey full of insights, full of lessons, starting with the public sector as an economist, an intern in one of the ministries, the Ministry of Agriculture in Malawi, and then moving on to a microfinance institution, still with the purpose of helping contribute to making the world a better place for everybody, leaving no one behind. And then 15 years ago, joining the civil society, the whole world of advocacy, fighting from the trenches in a way. I think this is how others like describing it, looking at the policy, pushing for results. So social accountability is effectively about the results. And thanks indeed to Professor Madonsela, I think, for taking us through such illuminating insights around democracy, having started from Africa, from here, trying to make things work for all. Now, one of the major lessons, I think, in this journey of learning that I've been a part of, I think as a part of that, I also ended up in the Malawi Human Rights Commission. I just concluded my second term as a commissioner 2 weeks ago. how do we reach out to them to listen to us with the, what we are saying about some things that are working, but some things that are also not working, that are maybe hindering anything that might work. So the demand side and the supply side, I think the interplay has always been very, very useful. And I think it's one of those huge incentives for us pushing for this social accountability that should really make us see the results. So it becomes easier now, I think, as we focus on the shared purpose, because it all boils down to that common denominator. There's a shared purpose. We want to see our countries developing, connecting to what we see that development to mean. The ideals, the motivations, so what sort of implementation arrangements do we need to have so that we push in that direction? Minimizing on these things that are not working well, but being bold to mention them, but very amicably, very constructively, because we don't want to see doors slamming, in our faces. Because the moment that happens, because maybe we're being too confrontational, then that's the end of that opportunity. So these are some of the things that I would say I think should really be as a part of this incentive. It's working, it has always worked. You will see, the government, you will see the duty bearers at any level, being willing to listen to you because they believe there's something that you are communicating, and then they even open up their hearts and then they tell you the frustrations that they are also facing. And you realize that they're only human beings, and all of us, we're simply wearing different hats. I might be wearing a hat of a civil society. They're wearing a hat of a politician. They're wearing a hat of a president, a minister, or a media, but we are all the same, I think, at heart. So this is one of those things. Now I think moving further, I think there are all these issues, because I think you will see the gaps and the frustrations, some of them pertaining to skills or capacities. So the empowerment, because it's a learning adventure. I think life is a learning adventure. No one claims to know it all at every point. When they'll be doing that, that I think there's something that is wrong with them. So there's always that room, the elephant in the room is the room for improvement. So empowerment, skills development, I think these are some of the other things that we are seeing. The shared learning, I think, needs to continue. So the forward and backward linkages, because I think I wanted to agree, I think there was a point about, this being multidimensional, development, the results and whatever, it's multidimensional. And I think it's important because of that aspect, when we're looking at the incentives, to also make sure that we look at the bigger picture, and then we make sure that we connect the dots, from the different vantage points. So understanding those incentives from the different vantage points, I think it always works. What's the motivation for a civil society? What's the motivation for a government minister? What's the motivation for a district commissioner at the local level? What's the motivation for a government extension worker in health or agriculture or whatever at the other level? And how do we make sure that that collective responsibility approach is really happening? So this is something that I thought I could add to this very rich, the rich insights that are already coming through, the rich insights that have been shared by Professor. I think the what's in this for us, it's real. What's in this for them, as we are looking at the collective responsibility, what's in this for me? All of us, the sooner we understand that, the sooner we learn that I think we are failing. It's better to fail fast so that we learn fast, and then be willing to get better and make sure that we push to the right direction. So the issues of the trust and whatever, I think with the whole bedrock of all these things, it becomes easier, and then you see this rapport, and the partnership now has, I'm a living testimony of all of that, where the governments, we've had pendulum swings, an extreme left where you are at loggerheads with the civil society, and then maybe it swings the other way, there's some level of appreciation of the civil society. We've survived all of this, and then getting the government officials, the senior government officials, including the president, all the way down, getting them to really appreciate the hard hitting that you are doing, but you're coaching it very, constructively, appreciating that, and then coming out and telling you, I think I think I enjoy hearing and listening to you, because you are pointing us in the right direction. Let's continue with this collective responsibility. So I think for me, that's part of maybe what I can add to the incentive structure, the collective action, implementation of this enhanced social accountability strategy that needs to continue. That is the only hope for this answerability and the management of the consequences, as Professor highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So I'm looking at the time now. We've got 20.
Also have to emphasize, we should agree that we are also part of the problem, and if we can clean our own house, it will be very easy to go and then point out the dust in the other houses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we can bring the mic across to Karabo on this side. If you could put your hand up. If the speaker would like the question answered by a particular panelist, please point that out.
Sure. Hi, my name is Karabo, I'm from Amapungani. My question is around enforceability. And my question is first of all to Auditor General. One of the things that's happening now, so the muscle to have some kind of accountability mechanism. From your experiences, is that the gap between findings and accountability, the ability to be able to enforce, have teeth? And I'd also like to direct it to the Commission from the South African Human Rights Commission, is that do you find that in your work, the difficulty is being able to enforce your findings? And is that somewhere we need to be looking if we want to have greater accountability?
Thank you very much. We have a hand up in the front, Delva. I did miss a hand earlier, that's the fourth hand. So we'll end with the fourth hand and then we'll turn it over to the panelists.
Thank you. My question actually arises from Mr. Mohammedi's point when he was talking about the post-1994 generation of youth having that don't care attitude and being careerist. And then it made me reflect and think about the youth in general, not just in South Africa, but elsewhere. In that, and I can talk briefly about some of the studies we have conducted in Tanzania under Taweza, where we find that when it comes to youth participation, attending meetings, speaking in meetings, writing through the media, they are the lowest in terms of participation compared to other age groups. But when it comes to likelihood of them protesting and submitting their dissatisfaction through demonstrations, they have the highest likelihood. So the questions here are, have we failed the youth if we have resulted in this situation of this kind of disloyal youth, the don't care youth? We can label them as being less patriotic. They do care about their well-being, they do care about their survival, but maybe the approaches and the processes have not been accessible to them, have not helped them to submit their dissatisfaction and also cause change. So how do we deal with that group? And they are the majority of populations in all our countries.
Thank you. Then we have one final question before we come back to the panelists. Note that in the breakaways after lunch, some of these conversations can be deepened and elaborated upon. So there will be further opportunity after lunch.
Hi everyone, my name is Sanel, I'm from Tumor Foundation. I meant to ask this question earlier on, but unfortunately I was the one who was cut off. I want to ask in perspective from the youth, which is similar, it's a similar question to the gentleman there, in terms of them participating in social accountability. And the question goes like this: in light of democracy working for all and having the public inclusive of social justice and accountability, how can we structure ourselves to include, in particular, the young people who are not in prominent positions? Also, how can we use the partnerships, which is what the Prof talked about earlier on, the partnerships of the good doers, the incentivized? How can we use that partnership to influence young people in having a culture of being socially conscious and having the spirit of accountability from a young age? Thank you.
Great. Okay, so let's go back to the first question, which was posed by Frederick, I believe. And his concern was fostering dialogue, but what about awareness? Concerned with awareness.
I completely agree with Frederick that, and I think this is the problem which we are facing, that sometimes both as CSOs and as duty bearers, we do not really equip the people we are serving with information. You know, you find a CSO operating in a local government authority claiming that they are representing the people in that locality, but they have not taken the trouble of making those people aware of what this CSO is doing on their behalf. And therefore, without sensitization and awareness of the people being served, the appreciation of the efforts of the CSOs will be minimal. That's what I can say about, we need to sensitize the people. They need to know what the CSOs are there for, how the actions are going to benefit them, and by doing that, involve them in the process of doing the social accountability. Of course, people cannot demand the rights which they do not know. Absolutely. They will not, because they will not have the knowledge. They will not know what is their right. So I think it is our duty, particularly so CSOs and the media, because for some governments, believe me, it's good if those people they are ruling, they do not know, because they will not have the basis of creating pressure on the governments themselves. But I think for the CSOs and the media, I think it's very, very important that we bring that awareness and knowledge of what is there for them. Madame, can I answer the other question? And no, before I go to that, thank you very much. You talked of the CSOs cleaning our houses. That's why I said in my presentation that through to, you know, we need as CSOs, we need to demonstrate what we are advocating. We really need to be open, we need to be transparent, we need to be accountable on our actions for us to be accepted. And if we do that, I said, it will bring about the trust which the professor raised, that where there is mistrust, there can never be a meaningful dialogue or, you know, the partnership in development. Because I don't trust you, you don't trust me. And therefore, and this unfortunately is the situation most CSOs are facing in most of our countries. But as far as building trust is concerned, I'll give a very brief example of what the Tanzanian CSOs are doing. We had, in the previous government, our fourth phase government, it was a sort of friendly government, liberal. It allowed the civic space. There was no, believe me, there was no much restrictions. But right now, we are having a government which is not that, is that type of allergic to criticism, you know, and, but the issue here is, this government we are having today, they are still ready and willing to listen. And that's why in Tanzania, we have an umbrella CSO called the Foundation for Civil Society. It is organizing a week-long CSO week in our new capital, Dodoma, where members of parliament, the ministers, the government are being involved. And the whole idea is to mitigate this civic space shrinkage, you know, so that the government understands the CSO's objective better. And in that week, there are groups, CSO groups, which have been nominated. They are going to have dialogue with the key government ministries and offices, specifically to talk, discuss with them on the role of CSOs in assisting the government to rule better. So, yes, as CSOs, we should not lose hope. We should continue looking for avenues of improving the working relationship between ourselves and the government, and reducing the mistrust which has been on for some time. Karawona, you talked of enforceability of recommendations. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly.
Karabo.
Karabo. Karabo. Oh, sorry, madam. Sorry, madam. Karabo. Enforceability of recommendations from oversight institutions like the Auditor General. I am happy to hear that the Auditor General here has been given more teeth. But I would say that we have two major types of supreme audit institutions across the globe. We have what is known as the Westminster model, which is modeled on the British system. And under that, the Auditor General has no legal powers to implement his recommendations. But rather than, there are law enforcing institutions established to do that. That will be the Anti-Corruption Bureau, that will be the Director of Public Prosecution, and the like. And this is the mode which Tanzania has to date, and this is also the system which South Africa had. That we are not using the Napoleon method, whereby, you know, the Supreme Audit Institution is primarily constituted of high court, you know, law, judges, and that they would audit and they would supervise the implementation. And what I can say is that one of the things, I think, which is a big problem in most of our countries is the insufficient implementation of recommendations arising from oversight institutions. Whether you are looking at it from the Auditor General's point of view, or you are looking at it from the parliamentary side of, point of view. But what is to be done on this? I think, Ray, you know, that we met at Washington on the IBP thing. In actual fact, the International Budget Partnership is an NGO based in Washington, is working on, is conducting a study on what should be done to make the implementation of recommendations from Supreme Audit institutions implemented in a greater rate as it is today.
Maybe if I could just add there, one of the progress markers for the enforceability of these results and findings is ensuring awareness at community level.
Absolutely.
So that members of the public can ask difficult questions of politicians. We're aware that this department, this entity in government performed poorly because the audit results are accessible and they're presented sometimes in formats that ease access to them. So I've seen encouraging developments on Auditor General's websites where the data is more user-friendly, so that a wider grouping of citizens can understand and then use that information to put pressure on government. So that's an encouraging development. Mindful of time, do you want to just make one concluding remark and then I can turn it to you?
Yes, please. On that one, I was just going to say that at Wajibu Institute of Public Accountability, we have addressed that particular issue. We take the Controller of the General's report, we simplify it in a simpler language, user-friendly language. A 480-page report, it comes out in 18-20 pages. And that one, people are making maximum use of it. And I think that is what CSOs could do to assist in disseminating such recommendations to the public. Thank you.
Many thanks. So the next question was put to Advocate Ameria, and it was from Kwaweza, and one of the questions was, have we failed the youth?
I think we have. Because our youth are basically taking our democracy for granted. I take my own personal experience. In my family, our children just want. They don't know how to share, they don't understand the spirit of Ubuntu and how the other half lives. As long as me, myself, and I are taken care of, I'm happy. Now that to me is worrying. It's worrying because we need to do more as an institution. How do we do more? And I think what we did at the Human Rights Commission through a program called the Access to Justice Program, we revisited the whole Bill of Rights education program in school curriculum. And what we then did was, together with the Department of Basic Education, we worked through a system where we're taking the children from grade 0 right to grade 12 through the fundamental principles of the Bill of Rights. I think that is important. So in the primary school years, we teach them the values of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Okay? And then in the high school years, which is grades 8 and 9, we teach them the importance of civil and political rights. And in grade 10 and 11, we teach them socio-economic rights and the importance of them. And when they exit the system in grade 12, we give them a copy of the Constitution with the preamble and the Bill of Rights and where to access justice. So when they walk out into civil society, they are basically going to be much more aware. They don't have to be lawyers to effect the Bill of Rights principle. We further went one step further, and now we've got a national moot court competition that is compulsory, that runs every year annually in the Constitutional Court, where children from all 9 provinces at that level, in high school level, would present a problem statement on the violation of Bill of Rights before Constitutional Court judges as well. So I think we need to go back to basics, and that's how we need to do it. What I found interesting about that particular project, which we just finished last year, was that the whole world was grappling with that, the question that you asked, how to get a value system into society so that we have a different product at the end of the day. And South Africa basically was commended by the Human Rights Council for that initiative. And the Council of Education of Ministers in SADC have accepted that as a blueprint plan for that education model in our schools. And what the result is, in 2019, we have targeted 360,000 teachers who are going to be the beneficiaries of that education program, and their target audience is going to be 10 million children. So we will get a better product later on. Time will tell, but as opposed to what it was, it's definitely a step in the right direction. I just wanted, while I've got the mic, Chair, to say about the recommendations that Karabo asked and the impact that it has, the legal enforceability. I think the South African Human Rights Commission Act itself, we have biting powers and barking powers. In the past, we used to just bark, and those reports used to come and it used to be glossy and it used to lie on the shelves of Parliament. But now, since the public protector did the famous EFF case, where Chapter 9s were recognized that their findings had biting powers, I think government is much more responsive now to and alive to our recommendations. And therefore, the new reports that are coming up from the Human Rights Commission, we not only make recommendations on the findings we have, but we also have directives. We direct them to do A, B, and C. And should they fail to do so, we will leverage the other powers that we have in the South African Human Rights Commission Act to go to the Constitutional Court to have that kind of results. So we've learned along the way as well. But it has been a learning curve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sanele, your question around inculcating it with the youth was touched on in the advocate's response, but please do take that up with him and myself and the panelists over lunch. We're going to break now for lunch. Our lunch venue is, as you walk out of this venue, you turn right. But before I give you a few more details on that, I'd like to please ask for a round of applause for the panel. We will reconvene at 2 o'clock. It's now 1:05. We'll be back in this venue, so don't run off to any other venue. We'll have a plenary session.